So, Oish Yudalit. So the Rebbe was talking about the advantage of Yaakov's avodah and Ayid's avodah of taking the world Gashmius b'chol drachecha da'ehu. That's the way we fulfill the intent of creation. Nisava Kodesh Baruch Hu liyos dira b'tachtonim. So we have a dira b'tachtonim. We have this through changing Gashmius. And not only that, even the B'chol Drachecha De'ehu, Masech L'Shem Shamayim is even more lower. And when that is elevated, that accomplishes the purpose, the intent of creation, of Nisava Kodesh Baruch Hu. We make a dira la'atzmusa yizbarach to Hashem. But the Rebbe is going to continue that the advantage that comes through the avodas habirurim with the physical, with the asiya, with the doimim, is not only because that's being fulfilling the dira lo yisbarach, but it's actually the person himself. When a person works with the gashmis, he reaches the level of a Baal Tshuva. The Rebbe is going to explain the whole purpose of the neshama to come down here is instead of a tzaddik, not to be a tzaddik, but is to be a Baal Tshuva. A tzaddik, the neshama was before too. And the way you become a Baal Teshuva is by turning things around. The true pleasure above and the joy comes from the novelty, the fact that you become a Baal Tshuva. Through that level, the person gets elevated. Let's look inside. To explain this idea deeper, the Rebbe is going to explain which idea? The idea. The that the main service for the purpose for which the soul descended below is to take from the stones, take the doimim of the makom, which is godliness obscured. It's the olam obscured. To understand it, ba'emek yoser a little deeper. To understand this deeper. Yuvan Bahagdim will understand this by introducing Shahayisraim Bahavoida, the Chol Masechel L'Shem Shamayim B'Chol Drachecha Da'ehu. There is an advantage of the service in which all that we do, whatever we do, and we do it for the sake of Hashem, and in all of our ways we know Hashem. We have to understand that this type of service of all your actions should be l'shem shamayim, and in know Hashem all the ways is higher al ha'avodah the limud ha'toyda v'kiyum ha'mitzvahs, that there is an advantage in this avodah over the service of studying Torah kiyum ha'mitzvahs. Hu lo rak b'negei la'pa'ula ba'olam. It's not only to this impact in the world. It's not only that through Masech L'Shem Shamayim B'chol Drachecha Da'ehu you have a greater impact in the world, making a Dira Le'Yisborach in the Tachten She'ein Lamato Yimenu Shal Yidei Ha'avodah B'chol Masech L'Shem Shamayim. Because when you have the service and everything that you do L'Shem Shamayim is Barer Gam HaTachten Da'elam. Also the lower of the world is this Barer Kinal Siftes, as we mentioned earlier in Siftes. So it's more than that. It's not only that the impact on the world is greater, and therefore you're fulfilling the creation Elogam. This is also true as far as the person is concerned. That a person gets a higher level when he works with the L'Shem Shamayim B'chol Drachecha Da'ehu, more than even Torah mitzvahs. We're going to explain that, and once we'll explain that, we will understand more what's the significance deeper of Vayikach Mabnei Amokim. So the Rebbe explains, Va'inyan hu, the idea is, the Hine Yodua, it's known, She'yiridas HaNeshama Yirida Tzorech Aliyah. The descent of the soul is a descent for the purpose of an elevation. Through descending below, he misalis yoiser gam mifi kefi shahoiso koidem hayirida. She is elevated more, even higher than it was before the descent. Not only does the neshama go back to the place from where it came, but through the descent, it elevated also to a spot, to a place higher than the neshama was before it came down. What is this elevation that we're talking about? What is the idea of the elevation? Who? Shabo le'inyan hatshuva. That it comes to the level of tshuva. That's the elevation. Before the Yerida, the neshama was in the level of a tzaddik, but through coming down in this world, the neshama comes to the level of teshuvah, being about tshuva. Shakoydem Yerida salamato so b'bchinas tzaddik gomor. Before descending below, the neshama was in a level of a tzaddik, a complete tzaddik. Tzaddik, a complete tzaddik. But through its service, when it descends below, Nasa is bechinas Baal Tshuva. She becomes in the level of Baal Tshuva. So, you say, hey, what's the point? Isn't that tzaddik a greater level? Why we're coming down to become a Baal Tshuva? Seems like a tzaddik may even be a greater level. Vagam sheyesh yisrei b'avodas hatzadikim al avodas habalei tshuva. Even though there is an advantage of tzadikim on the balei tshuva. It's interesting that in the Gemara, in another place, the Gemara brings down a story that the king and the queen, they were having a discussion. What is more tastier, the meat of a sheep or the meat of a goat? So they went and they asked him, and he said, well, the korbanos are always brought from sheep, not the kvosim neshana tmimim, the korban tamid is brought from sheep. Must be that sheep is better. So he sided with the king, and he says, had the goats been better meat, then the korban would have been out of goats. But in any event, this idea of sheep and goats, the king and the queen, represents the level, it's brought down in other places, the level of Madua Izgi Masgi Beresha. It represents the idea of tzadikim and Balid Shuva. The sheep versus goats. Sheep represents tzadikim, goat represents Balid Shuva. And the fact that the Tmidim, korban tamid, was from sheep, that means that the avodah of tzadikim has an advantage. Shalochein hatmidim hoyu mikvosim v'loy miizim. That's why the korban tamid was, the constant korban was out of sheep and out of goat, which is like says imra yoid. That means that the sheep is better. It's a question: imra yoy or gadya yoy? Gadya would be the goat. But in any event, that's a reference, that's a hint to the fact that Baal Tshuva have a Maila. But yet, and still the other thing, K'maymer Hazal, our sages of blessed memory say, B'min nimlach, who did Hashem consult about creating the world? B'nishmoi seihen shel tzadikim. He consulted the souls of the tzadikim. Doesn't say the souls of the Baal Tshuva, he's consulted the souls of tzadikim. And over there, those souls were all in the level of tzaddikim anyways. So we see that tzaddikim have a maila over Baal Tshuva. That's why we bring the kvasim and not the goats, and nimlach in the shem shel tzaddikim. So why are we saying that the reason the neshama comes down milmaila is so it can become a Baal Tshuva, the neshama Baal Tshuva? What kind of advantage is that? So the Rebbe explained, Hinei hayisrein da avodas hatzadikim umitzad harotzin shaboy. The advantage of the service of tzaddikim, that's the will of Hashem. Hashem wants lechatchila. Hashem wants you to be a tzaddik. Shaboy shayich inyan hamlocha. Hashem wants to create, so then Hashem consults. Who is he consulting? Meaning, we're dealing about to consult. Who do you consult? You consult the tzaddik, because Hashem wants in the rotzen, the will to create, he wants a tzaddik. But when we talk about Masha'enke mitzad atzmusi yisbarich, but when we talk about from the prospect of the blessed essence, Hashem's essence, b'chinas Baal Horotzin, the level of the master of the will, not the will itself, but the master of the will, Iker hakavona hu be'inyan hatshuva davke. The main intent is teshuva, specifically teshuva. That's the main intent. Yes, there's a mile in tzaddikim, mitzad rotzin. The level of rotzin is tzaddikim. The Rebbe wants to be tzaddikim. But in the level of atzmus, the main intention is for people to be Baal Tshuva. This is also why our sages of blessed memory say that mokoim shabali tshuva emdim ein tzadikim gemurim yichaylim lamed bay. That the place of Baal Tshuva where they stand, the tzadikim are complete tzaddik cannot stand there, meaning they're not at that level at all. The tzaddikim are not able to stay on the level of the Baal Tshuva because the Baal Tshuva is higher. Now it uses the lashon, emphasize yichaylim lamed sham. There's one thing to say that they don't stand there, and there's another thing they don't even have the ability to stand there, which means that they're far removed. The Baal Tshuva is much higher in this aspect from the tzaddik. As the Rebbe explains in the brackets, it is not just that they don't actually stand there. What he's saying more, they cannot stand there. That means they're not even able to stand there. This is the version that is brought down in the Maimorim on the Posik V'Shavti B'Sholim. Because sometimes we say, but in the Maimorim he quotes like the Rebbe says here, and Yechaylim Lamed Bay, which means they're not having the ability to stand it. B'Hainu. And when we say Yechaylim, Shemailas Abal Tshuva, the advantage of Abal Tshuva is greater, Gam Yichoiles HaTzadik, even from the ability of the Tzadik. When we talk about Yichoiles, capabilities includes even the level of how higher than your powers, that is the potential. You don't even have the potential to be there because we're saying Yechoilis Ulamayla Mibchinas Koyach. Potential Yechoilis is higher than the power. That is the power that you actually have. Gam Koychas Hamakifim, also from the surrounding Koychas. Yechoilis means the potential, which is even higher than that. And still, we're saying that the tzaddik doesn't even have the potential, which means even in his highest level, even in his potential, the tzaddik doesn't have the ability to be with the Baal Tshuva. Why is that? Inyan hatshuva magia ba'atzmus yisborech. Because the idea of tshuva reaches into this blessed atzmus. Shekol hagiluyim, all the revelations, which is shodesh avodas hatzadikim, the revelations, that's the root of this service of the tzadikim, comes from the level of God's revelation, but it's not compared at all. They have no comparison to him at all. To the level of Atzmus, there's no comparison. And therefore, the potential from the tzaddik who reaches into the level of Giluyim is not at all the ability of a tshuva, of a Baal tshuva who has the level of Atzmus. And this explains now another point in this psukim over here. Yaakov asks the Eibishter, I want to return back home. If I return, if you'll be with me, v'shavti b'sholem el beis avi, I will return back to my father's home. Why doesn't he say, I'll return back to Beersheba? That's where he came from. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheba. So he should say, v'shavti b'sholem el Beersheba. Why does it say v'shavti b'sholem El Beis Avi? Because he's actually talking about that through Veshafti, through the tshuva, he will come to Beis Avi, which is a higher madrege than the madrege of Beersheba. Tezvav. Papi Hanal Yuvon. Based on the above, we understand Mashe Kosuv Veshafti B'Sholem El Beis Avi. Return, peace to my father's home. The tzarich lahavin. We need to understand. It seems what is return? When you say to return, you would understand it to me. You go back, you return back to the place you were in the beginning. So v'shavti b'sholem should be back in the place where you started off, being Cain in that case. Mekivon shebi yitzias. Yaakov, Nemar Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva. So since when Yaakov leaves, it says he leaves, Yaakov goes out of Beersheva. Should have said, I go back in peace to Beersheva. Why is he going back to my father's home? But now the Rebbe explains, we can say, because you're talking not going back to Beersheba, you're going back to a higher madrega than Beersheba. You're going back to the Beis Avi. We can say the idea in this. Misal is hanishom libechina nailis yoser. Mikmoi shahoisel lifnei ridosokinal. Since it reaches a higher level than it was before its descent, like we said before, it goes back higher. L'chein, inyan b'shavti, therefore the return. Loyle Beersheva, you're not going to Beersheva. Hadarga shel haneshama k'mo shehoisa koidim yiridosa. That would be, it comes from Beersheva. That was the level, the step of the neshama that it was before it descended. Ki'im el beis avi. You're actually going back to my father's home, a higher level, which is higher than the level of Beersheba. And we could add to this, not just Beis Avi in a general way, but to specifically Beis Avi means to Yitzchak. It comes back to the level of Yitzchak. That who was Beis Avi? That was Yitzchak. Yitzchak means laughter, tzchoik, tainug. The idea of teshuvah, because when you turn things around, you take gashmis and you bring down godliness, you bring about the level of tainug, you bring about the level of delight, of joy. So that's actually brings Yitzchak, that brings the level of joy and laughter. Literally, meaning it goes on Yitzchak. The Yitzchak hu meloshin simcha v'tainug. Yitzchak comes from the language of joy and pleasure. V'yadua, and it's known. How does one get pleasure? it's known shetainug zeh hatainug shebetzchoik. This particular tainug, the joy, the delight that brings laughter, umidvar chidush. That's from some novelty. Dafke. If you see, usually in Chassidus they bring a bird speaking. That brings tainug and laughter because this is the unusual. Umikivon she'inyan hatshuva udvar chidush. Since the idea of tshuva is a novelty, Balderech Mashekosov Rambam be'inyan hatshuva kipshuta lavedus. This is similar. What's the chiddush? It's like Rambam writes, when a person, literally, when a person does tshuva for sins, not just talking about return the neshama to a higher place. We're talking about doing tshuva for literal sins. Shemailus hatshuva hi mitzadzen. That what is the advantage of tshuva is because of this. She'emesh hoyozem uvdul chulu. That yesterday this person was separated by Yom Mutbek b'Shechina, and today he's connected to the Shechina. So there is a novelty here. The novelty is yesterday he was far away and now he's connected to the Shekhinah. This is a novelty, and the same thing is the idea of tshuva is a novelty. That's why through the service of tshuva, this brings about a delight and a laughter above. Shetainuk said that tainuk that comes from turning things around, from being mevader the world, is greater. This is greater than the avodah of tzaddikim. That's why about tshuva is loved and more endeared to Hashem even more than a tzaddik. Because the main delight from above is through the service of tshuva. The Baal Teshuva, working on teshuva and return, that is the main maila, and that's why the Eibishter enjoys that. That's what the Eibishter has the most tainig of. This is also the reason Masha Baal Teshuva and Tzoyek v'nena miyad. Baal Teshuva yells out to Hashem, and Hashem responds right away. More than a tzaddik, because he's loved more. He's more endeared to Hashem. But not only does Hashem answer the Baal Teshuva right away, he answers him even before he cries out. Asher v'hoya tarim yikrov ani ene. Even before you call out to me, I'm going to answer. The Eibishter gives them even before they have a chance to ask Hashem, to cry out to Hashem. Although, according to the order, a response comes after you call. You respond to somebody who calls you. But here, the Eibishter says, I'm going to respond before you call. How could you respond? They didn't even call. It's not the avoid. This is the avoid about tshuva. Ki hatainuk shalamaylo. Because this delight of above that comes from this novelty of the service of tshuva, poyel chidush, this impacts a chidush, hepech haseder, against the order, gam lemaila, also above. Terem yikro vaniene, before you call, I'll respond. So basically, the Rebbe explained that the maila of working and changing things around, that it makes the person about tshuva, not only in the world that did it betachtoinim, but it brings the level to the person of teshuva, and when it brings the level to the level of teshuva, which is endeared to Hashem. Yes, there's a maila in tzaddikim, but the maila in atzmus is the maila of about teshuva, and that's why the Baal Teshuva has the preferences in the various different areas. Tezayin. Where is the change take place? In our body, in our animal soul. That we're in Golus, we're down here, and we're still connecting to Hashem. That's the change, that's the tshuva. The neshama, before it comes down, is just a soul. Doesn't have the challenges. Tezayin. In the Iker HaChidush, The main novelty, hagoyim hatainug v'atzchok shalamayla, that causes the light and the laughter of above, hu achidu shenase beguf v'nefesh habahamis gufa, is the novelty that takes place in the body and the animal soul itself. In other words, not only in the world, it's not somewhere else, it's in your own body, it's in your own animal soul. There itself is the change that you change yourself around causes this tainug. V'hainu sha'tshuva de nefesh alikis. What is the return? What is the tshuva of the nefesh alikis? That it comes back, that's not a novelty. The novelty is that it brings along the nefesh habahamis, the animals. Sha'tshuva the nefesh alikis, the nefesh alikis, mashegam bid also lamato. The fact that the nefesh alikis, when it descends below, gam bizman hagolus, also during the time of exile, he esekes b'Torah mitzvahs, it still occupies itself in learning Torah, doing mitzvahs. Va'afilu zen, even the fact that the nefesh alikis, shegam asiyos in yoni harishus, even when it does optional matters, he l'shem shamayim, is for the sake of heaven, ba'ad, to the extent, b'ba'ifin the da'eu, in a way that you know Hashem. These are the two levels, in doing l'shem shamayim and actually knowing Hashem from what you do. Einay chidush kol kach, but that's not such a novelty. Mikivan shehir lakus be'etzem mehusa. The nefesh lekis is godly in its essence, what it is. And therefore this doesn't bring such delight that it does, that it struggles and it succeeds. But the ikar hatainuk shalamayla, but the main delight above, hu b'hachidush shenase b'haguf v'nefesh habahamis gufa. That is the novelty that takes place in the body and the animal soul itself, that they changed around. Hein ba'oifon dihishapcha, whether it's in a way to turn totally around. Al yidei avodas hatzadikim. The avodas hatzadikim, they turn the nefesh habahamis, that it turn them into godly. Behein ba'oifon dihiskafya, or it's a way of subduing it, forcing the nefesh habahamis to go along. Al yidei avodas habenunim, the service of the benunim. A tzaddik is able to turn his nefesh habahamis around, gets that level of teshuvah by turning it totally around. The benunim, they can only get to force themselves to do, that's iskafia. And these two types of avodas, the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, sheheim shnei minei nachas ruach. Those are two different delights. The Hashem has, these are tainuk. There is two delights, just like in food. The Alter Rebbe explains there is some food that is sweet, and then there's some food that is bitter, and you sweeten it and you make it tasty. Though there are different enjoyments. And you have matamim loshon rabim. Aseli matamim, what Yitzchak said to make tasty food, this is loshon rabim. So you have these two types of tainuks. Tainuks from the ishapcha, tainuks from iskafia. The tainuk zen, this delight, this is higher than the tainuk that the neshama services. Even the work of tshuva of the neshama is not the tainuk. Ultimately, the tainuk is from the avodah that you do with the nefesh habahamis. As the Zohar said, when you subdue and you turn around the other side, then the glory of a kuchabrichu enters all worlds. How do you get the light of Hashem in all the world? It has to be iskafia v'ishapcha, to take the sitra achra, to take the nefesh habahamis, which comes from the other side, not the part that the nefesh alikis itself stays intact, but the fact that you take the sitra achra, you take the nefesh habahamis, and you force it, and you turn it around in order to get the glory of Hashem in all the world. Sha'oir hanimshach al yidei iskafia v'ishapcha. light which extends, which we draw down through subduing the Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh Bahamis, and through turning it around, it's a light which is beyond Kalim, it's higher than vessels. And that's why we call it Shalachem Nikra B'Shem Istalik, removed. When a histalkus means removed, to take away. Here we're saying it comes. We bring in a removable light, which means a light which is higher than Kalim, a light that we can't accept, we can't receive. We call this receiving this light, we call this stalik. So that is specifically when we change around the nefesh habahamis and the guf that we get this greater light. And the greatest, the light of above. This is what is explained in the Torah Oir from the Alter Rebbe, Teres Chaim from the Mittler Rebbe, Bepirush v'shavti b'sholem el beis Ovi. They explain that what does it mean b'sholem beis Ovi? They explain that it's the nefesh habahamis. Lo yinyan hatshuva the nefesh elikis. They don't explain it as the tshuva of the godly soul. Ki makshuva the iskafia v'ishapcha sitra achra mechasheichel l'nahira. They specifically translate this, the tshuva, and the subduing and turning around the other side from darkness to light, not bringing back, not tshuva of the nefesh elikis, but by subduing the other side. And the reason is ki hatzchoik v'atainug shel mailo. When do you go back to a base ovi? Bringing about tzchoik, yitzchok. The tzchoik, the laughter and the delight of above, el base ovi, yitzchok meloshen tzchoik v'tainug. When do you go back el base ovi to yitzchok? Nase be'iker al yidei iskafia v'ishapcha. Mainly, that takes place through iskafia v'ishapcha. That is how the Rebbe explains why the Pasuk says "V'shavti b'sholem el beis ovi," not to Be'er Sheva, because you actually go to a higher place, and specifically beis ovi to Yitzchok, because Yitzchok is the Tainug, because the real Tainug comes from the Avodah v'Iskafia v'Ishapcha, the Avodah Habirurim. So that's why we reach into the higher level of the level of Baal Tshuva. And that's eventually the advantage for the person himself, the neshama, from being in the level of a tzaddik to become in the level of a Baal Tshuva. Okay, let's leave it over here.
Okay,
And
thank
we'll
you very
be
much.
tomorrow, Be'ezus Hashem.